Hello everyone, welcome back to the Java course 2023. In this video, we are going to discuss about how constructors and static block work with respect to the inheritance and how and what is the use of the super keyword. Okay, so let's talk about it. So we have not yet discussed how constructors and static blocks work here. We have just seen about how the methods work, right? So first we will create constructors. So I create a constructor house inside house constructor. Okay, and similarly I will create a constructor for this. So constructor is created using the name of the class. So we'll say inside bungalow constructor. Perfect. So inside house constructor and inside bungalow constructor. Now you know that constructor is called when a new object is formed. So it's as simple. We are creating a new object of the child class and we are calling a method of the child class. As simple as that. So what we expect? We expect that this statement should run, the constructor will be called, and this method gym in the house will run. So let's see what we are getting. Now here, interesting thing we are getting is the two things we expected is coming up. But the one thing that we have not yet, we didn't know that it will also be coming is the constructor is called for the parent class also. So yes, when you are talking about inheritance, a child is inheriting from its parent class, then implicitly the constructor of the parent class is called first. Okay, it is always called, whether you want or not, it is not a question, it always is called up. So and also if you have multiple constructors, which we have discussed in the video of constructor, you can see in the I button or in the description of the playlist. There in the description you can see we have talked about the parameterized constructor. So if I say, suppose I just copy paste this constructor again and I just pass a parameter of string message. Suppose some message I'm passing and I'm saying inside constructor params mean parameters, parameterized constructor. And if I try to now run, you see that we are by default it is calling the default constructor of the parent class. Okay, now suppose you say that okay, it's calling the parent constructor, I want to call the parent constructor but not the default one, I want to call this parameterized constructor. So here comes the use of the super keyword. Okay, now super keyword you can use here like this, and you can call the parent constructor. Now how you can call the parameterized parent constructor? You can just pass the argument. So suppose you pass the argument, this is bungalow. Okay, if you pass this argument, then here you have to print the message, that whatever message will be passed will be printed. So you are passing the message inside the super keyword, this is bungalow, so it should be printed. And another thing to remember, and this is a very important thing, always the first statement inside the child class constructor is the super. You cannot write super after any statement. If you try to write after this statement, see, it's giving error. It's saying call to super must be the first statement in the constructor body. So remember this one, this is very important. Okay, so now if you try to call, if you execute the program, now it is written this is bungalow. Okay, so you are calling parameterized parent constructor. That's how the constructor call work in when it comes to inheritance, right? So whenever an object of child class is created, the constructor of the child class is called, and by default if you don't specify a super keyword, JVM itself will call the parent constructor using the super keyword behind the scene. Okay, a default constructor. Now let's talk about static keyword. So static block basically. So I write a static block and I say inside parent static block. Okay, and similarly I copy this and I go inside the child and I write inside child static block. Now if you remember from the last few videos in which I have discussed about the static keyword video. If you can, I will put that video in the I button. So if you see that video and if you are not familiar with it, you can see that. So the static block always execute first, even before the constructor. Why? Because when the class loads, when the Java programming, when the JVM starts to execute the Java program, first the class loads. And when the class loads, dot class files are made, even before the object is created. Okay. So when the class is loaded, the static block is called then, once the class loads up. That's why static block is called first. But it would be very interesting to see or to figure out which static block will be called first. So here it is inheritance. Okay. So what will happen when we are trying to execute this Java program? First, the parent class will load up and therefore its static block will execute. Then the child class will load up, and since it is inheriting from parent class, the static block of it also will execute, right? And finally the object, this statement will run. Okay, this statement will execute, the constructor will be called, then parent class constructor will be called, then child class constructor will be called, and any method then can be called. Okay, so if you run this, you will see this. Yeah, here if you are able to see, it is clear that first it is printing inside parent child static block. So first the static block of the parent class is executing, because first parent class will always load, then child class will load, so its static block is executing, the parent class constructor will be called, then child class constructor will be executed completely, all the statement after the parent class constructor is called, and then the method will be. So, and also remember, this parent class constructor calling is inside the child class constructor. Okay, not outside or something like that, right? So this is, you need to remember. Now there is another use of this super keyword. It is not just used for calling parent class constructor. It is also used for calling the properties and methods of the parent class. Let's see how. Suppose you have this method cook, okay, and you define your own cook method, public void, or let's say, okay, let's first define this. So you can say cooking in bungalow. Okay. So inside the cook method you have printed cooking in bungalow, right? Now how will you distinguish whether the cook method, or if you create another method, suppose public void display, and if you try to call, suppose cook, okay, how you will know that this is a parent class cook method or a child class cook method, right? But since every method which is inherited from the parent class has a copy of its reference inside the child class, so you can easily say that, okay, this cook method will be of child class, but now we have to call the cook method of parent class also. Suppose, how will you call that? You should have a way to distinguish between the two cook methods. So for that purpose, you have a parent class. For calling the parent class same method name, you have the keyword super. Now you call super.cook, it will call the parent class cook method, and if you just call the method cook, it will call the child class cook method. So if I write display and if I try to run it, you see that the super.cook, okay, where it is gone. Okay, so first we are calling the parent class cook method, so it is saying cooking in a house. Then we are calling child class cook, so it is calling cooking in bungalow, right? That's how the things work. So this is the flow, how I hope you understood. Similarly, we can access the properties, but one more thing you remember, we cannot call any method of the parent class. The method and properties of the parent class should be public or default. Only then we can call the parent class method or property using super keyword. If I make it, suppose if I make it private, Okay, now see, it's giving error because you cannot call. It is private to the parent class. You have no access to it. Okay, so you need to make it public if you want to access it, right? So this is about the super keyword. One last thing I want to mention, we have created the child object here. Let's create another child object, but here we will use a parent class reference. So we will say house equal to new bungalow. Now this is correct. It's not giving any error. Why it is not giving error? The reason behind this is because the child class is inheriting some properties and methods from the parent class, and you can call those properties and methods of the child class using a reference from the parent class. Okay, so you can call house.cook. This house.cook will invoke only the cook method of the parent class, sorry, child class, not the parent class. Even if it is the reference variable of the parent class, it will call the cook method of the child class. Let's understand how. Just let me comment this out. So if you try to call this, see, it is written cooking in bungalow. It's not saying cooking in a house. Okay, so you can use this reference also, but then you will say, if we can use this way, why we have this way for inheritance? Both ways, what is the difference between these two ways, right? The difference between the way of creating the object like this, by using a reference variable of the child class and by using the reference variable of the parent class, the difference is that if you use the reference variable of the parent class, then you can only access the properties and you can only call the methods that is present or that you have inherited. Only inherited properties and inherited methods you can call using the reference variable of the parent class. But if you want to call the methods like gardening or gym that you have created, which is not present or you have not inherited from your parent class, then you cannot call using a parent class reference. If you try to call this, see, if it will give you error. So to call this method, you will need to have a reference of your own class. So your own class will be gym. Now you can easily call it, right? So this is how also the things work, right? So I hope you have understood how the things work. Okay, to summarize everything in a brief, let's put it all together. When the Java program executes, then the first class to load is parent class, and when parent class is loaded, the static method or the static block executes of the parent class. Then the child class loads and its static block is also executed. After that, the object of the child class is created and the constructor of is called for the child class. When the constructor of the child class is called, implicitly or explicitly, the parent class constructor is called. If you don't explicitly define the super keyword, if you don't write the super keyword, then a default constructor of the parent from the parent class will be called. Okay, this is always gonna happen. Okay, and then all the logic after that will be executed inside the constructor, and then you can call any method from the child class. Next, you can create the child class object, and you can and the reference variable of the parent class can refer to it, but the condition is that the parent class reference variable can only call only those methods which the child class has inherited from the parent class. You cannot call the methods of the child class which is explicit or which is especially created only inside the child class. Okay, for that you have to create a reference variable of the child class. This is a bit confusing. Just go through the video again and again, two to three times. You may understood it, you may understand it more properly. Okay, don't worry about it. So that's all for this video. I hope you like the content and you understand the concept of how inheritance works, how constructors are called, how static block is called, and how the methods can be called from the child class reference and parent class reference. Okay, so you can subscribe to the channel if you have new here. You can subscribe if you are new here. You can like the video if you like the content. I will see you in the next video. Till then, bye bye.